What's the 58% based on?
58%
58% of
total
fees
revenue.
collected.
That's the
Fees collected
contract.
on a permit or a month or
All
what?
fees.
On every permit.
Every permit.
Except,
Mention what you
So-
just,
except if the valuation goes over $1 million, it actually drops to 55%.
yeah.
So John just asked me if I'm gonna, how many permits am I gonna pull next year? And so this gives you an idea of, my little microcosm of this, is I have spent a lot of money with the town of Atherton this year. I have 2 houses under construction. I've put in a ton of money on permits and plan check fees. I won't spend anything on permits next year. Just my little piece of this.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but
You can't,
you just look at the construction going on around here, there's gotta be a constant flow of work.
well,
Permits
there's
are
a
gonna be
flow,
good for them.
but it is, there are there are a dozen people or 20 people building houses in Atherton.
Well, I'm just trying to get a realistic
So it's
assessment.
just, it has this big swings.
But we only get 42% to cover our expenses. I'm just trying to get a realistic estimate to make sure that we cover our expenses out of the 42%.
We think that we're there conservatively, and to answer your question too, Greg, we did take a look at the long run. If you really look at the long run, we're doing about $1 million a year on average, and 977 is pretty darn close to $1 million.
Where do you see 977? I got 602. Oh, I see. You're
Down at the bottom.
I'm sorry.
So we're
I got it.
running about $1 million, and if we go over $1 million, it's a good year. And if we fall well under $1 million, it's not a good year.
So last year was an aberration, it was $1.4 million?
Well, it was reflective of the economy.
Well,
Well,
last
it
year
was
we
also
got it was
because
a dumper.
you had a couple of big projects at Sacred Heart and,
Yeah, absolutely.
That's
And
true
then-
too. There was,
All right, so there was an aberration last year.
yeah.
Okay, I wanted to make sure that we were covering our expenses out of the 42%.
Okay. I would point out that we've got to finish this by 1 o'clock for
All
different
right, well,
reasons.
we only got one more item, that's the police department, so.
Okay. Now we're going to non-department, that's where we have a couple of things that I'd like to point out quickly. We
Where are
have
you? I didn't hear you.
Non-department, page 24.
Well, documentation's on 23. I see you got all the IT stuff there.
Yes.
Okay, so that looks like enough money to do lots of good stuff. Actually, it's about 1% of the budget, which is, or the revenue, which is typical for a regular company like ours. And so we ought to be doing good stuff for this. So the 97,000, is that just to do a study, or is that to
No,
do
that's
a-
it. That is to
That shouldn't be the cost of
do
doing
the
study.
work.
To do the work, okay. All right, yeah, because the study we should be able to get somebody to do the study for free, or close to free.
The only,
Where's the telephone system?
the telephone system is coming out of equipment replacement fund, so it's not hard.
Okay.
Okay.
And if I could make a recommendation, all the costs for the unemployment insurance payouts that we're projecting, shouldn't they be moved to non-department as opposed to being in the department costs?
Because the costs always follow the employee for that department, and it's important that we track it, especially like building. If you have building employee that we pay unemployment, that is part of doing business for the building department, so it should rightfully
Well,
follow.
I think you could apply many of these things in the same answer to you and distribute them, but it's just a comment. It'd be nice to see it all in one location.
Joe, understand, the reason we do that is because, go back one notch, the last time I spoke. The building department cannot make a profit. A profit is a tax. Therefore, we expense these things to the individual departments so that none of them make a profit. In the end, government doesn't make money.
I agree, but at the end, but for a group such as the finance committee or the council making a decision and looking at things, a roll-up is better than 53 pages of spreading things out and people having to bring their calculators and carry totals forward.
I'm
FYI.
defending Louise's concept, which is a normal accounting practice for government entities, of putting the money
I
back
understand that.
so that you don't
I
pop
understand
that
that.
number.
But I'd like to see a roll-up.
We will prepare it.
Thank you. Okay.
And also, remember, if costs that are directly can be traced to a department, we take it there. Put it on non-department, you will go through the cost allocation. And the other thing I want to point out is the $30,000 for high-speed rail, that number could go up. Right now, it's only covered to September and may not have enough money.
Is that for Robbie?
Yes.
Well, we want to renegotiate that.
Okay.
Anyway, are we going to the police department now?
One last thing, we quickly, just on this thing, I want to point out that we are now including the county property tax administration costs in here as requested by the auditor and no longer netted against revenue. Included in here is also a potential to do a master fee schedule and cost allocation and employee hourly cost update, so I just want to point that out. That is in here for $25,000. Okay? Now we're gonna go on to the police department, and we have the chief here. This department, you can see, in 2011, at the end for media budget adjustment, they have 17 sworn officer, and this budget is increasing it to 19. We also, that's where the personnel cost is going. If you look at page 26, it's going to show that the expenditure from 2012 compared with 2011, based on the revised budget, is going to go up.
Where are you? You're losing me right there. Say it again.
Page 26,
I'm there.
we're looking at total salary and benefits from the revised budget for 2012 compared with the projected actual of 2011. It's going to show a cost increase of $285,000 because we're increasing the sworn position by 2.
But that's anticipating a savings and concessions and negotiations?
Right. This is with that, and again,
This does not include that.
right. The entire revised budget had no salary increase or step increase for employee other than APOA employee for step increase because of the MOU. Then the rest of it is we have, if you look at page 27, then I will turn it over to the chief. The total department cost for the police department is an increase of $352,000 because we do have our former chief here for expenditure to April of next year. And in the meantime, we also have an interim police chief here, so that we have some cost duplication. So that kind of explains the police department. And the most important thing in the back is on page 33, I believe, is the supplemental request from the police department, and I'm going to turn it over to the chief so that can
Well,
explain.
if we could ask questions before we do that.
Okay.
So with the addition of the 2 additional officers, are we going to do, is your plan to take a closer look at the accruing of the vacation as well as the overtime, because some of the vacation levels have been higher than what we've said that they should be and what actually our agreement says. Are we going to be driving those down to the acceptable and more manageable levels? Is that what the plan is?
Well, Bill, I think you're talking about apples and pears here. First of all, we've got things that are driven by an MOU and a contractual obligation to pay out for vacation and leave balances versus a manageable overtime issue. And generally speaking, when you start dropping the staff beyond what would be a reasonable amount, then the overtime comes up to cover. So somewhere we need to strike that balance to where we're not spending too much overtime on personnel, but we have enough personnel to cover the watches in the field.
And let people take vacations.
And let them take
And I
vacations.
think
And that's
that's
part
One
of
of the
yes,
things
to
that
your
John's
question.
going to be discussing are MOUs. So-
But I think the point Bill is making is as we get to 19 officers, is there some expectation that we might be able to, because we're not stretched so thin, 17 was too low. With 19 officers, we might be able to encourage more
Right.
vacation time and.
Yeah, so we get things down to more manageable level.
Yeah, I think it's going to help some. That, I want to do more of an in-depth study. My understanding is, and this is Jennifer Few from the police department, is that we had the 19 positions, but we were only 17 of those were filled. So we had 2 vacancies that we were running. So that is kind of the staffing model that previous chiefs had in place. And Herb and I were talking about that staffing model and whether or not that's the appropriate. It's close. But Bill, you're absolutely right. What we're gonna be having to look at is a more in-depth staff study of what is the appropriate number of sworn personnel for the
Well, does
department.
that affect your overtime, whether you have 17 or 19?
Oh, absolutely.
So is this gonna, if you increase the number of people, will the overtime go down?
That's what our plan is. But there are things that offset it. When you put more officers in the field, you generate more activities, more arrests, more citations, court. So you gotta strike that balance. It's not as easy as money in, money out sometimes.
But I also think that John rightfully is going to be looking at an opener on some of these contracts, police contracts, and hopefully that will result in some savings. Of course, we can't, because it's a union negotiation. There's no way that we can tell what's gonna happen there, but I'm hopeful that some of the MOUs might be changed, and, you know, in the town's favor, but who knows? But anyway, John is pursuing that.
And we need to burn down overtime and vacation time throughout the city, not just
Right,
throughout.
yeah, absolutely.
Let me just make a correction. Earlier I mentioned that the police department went up, is projected to go up 352,000 in cost. Actually, it's more like 410 because in fiscal year 2011, they received a $60,000 donation in the equipment.
Yeah,
that
for
was
new radios and
donated,
PCs,
yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
Well, the increase now is 352,000 on page 3, is that the accurate?
Actually, it will be plus another 60 because buried in there is a one-time cost of equipment purchase funded through donation. So the real increase is actually 410,000.
And is the main portion of that the two additional people?
2 additional people because we are paying for a former chief and a current interim chief.
What about the pension, healthcare benefits?
And their cost, the pension also go up another close to 100 and, I want to say 150,000 because their rate jumped 6%.
And our insurance, I think, is up too, goes up as well.
Insurance is not, it does go average about 5%, but we are negotiating. But mainly is because of the cost in our headcount and labor.
Is there, where are we on there? Who pays what as far as the percentages? Do we pay all of it? Do we pay half of it, or on the employer portions of the pension?
Right now, with the APOA, the town pay the employer's share plus 7% of the 9% for the sworn officer.
So we pay 9% for the employer portion?
We pay 38% for the employer portion.
How many?
38, over 38%,
You mean 38% of salary?
yes.
Well, no, but what is the percentage of the payroll that you pay for the employer portion versus the employee? Because 9% is a normal contribution, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, I would say about 45, what we pay for the employees, our.
45% of the employee
of the-
portion?
No, of the town's pay, sworn pay.
We're running about 45%
45%.
fully burdened. So 1.45 times the base salary would give you an actual.
Well, that's the result, but the actual contribution you pay to PERS for the employer and employee is based on the percentage of payroll.
Yes.
Right, and the town pays all of the PERS costs.
Except-
Employee and employer?
Yes,
Except 2% for sworn. They pay
it's
2%.
2%.
So we're spending more than $1 million a year on police retirement.
Yes, if you look at page,
What's our long-term strategy for getting that under control? And that's a huge amount out of our civil.
Well, we will be looking at a two-tiered system as part of the negotiations, that they'll come in under a different system. Unfortunately, the vested entitlements that we're already obligated to, there's not much we can do about it.
Or you're up for negotiation?
We're gonna request an opener.
Yeah, but in the past, you know, when we've had these meetings where we were talking about benefit levels and things like that, we said that we're bringing on additional people, you know, the goal was to have established a second tier. You know, we did that for the administrative.
Correct.
And so we've already hired a new person under the current system. So I guess, are we going to do the second tier thing before we bring on another employee, or what's the plan?
Well, we'll have to see about that because it's
Well, I think we made the decision at one time that we were going to not hire people unless we had a second tier. So I guess, so I don't see that there's much to discuss personally, John.
Well, we do have a second tier for non-sworn.
For what?
But we said we would do one for everybody,
Non,
non-sworn.
non-APOA,
You know,
because
sworn police officer?
what is that, a non-sworn?
You're not
Somebody who's
police
not a
officer.
police.
Dispatchers,
Oh, okay, dispatchers.
for one.
but this dispatch is still covered under the
I know,
APOA.
there's others in the department too that are,
Well, anybody
it's
who's not a
cops
police officer.
versus non-cops.
If we continue to do that, it seems to me we face a referendum like Benwell Park had, and force something down the police throat if we don't voluntarily negotiate something.
I read that San Diego there's some people working on that to have a referendum and make.
Well, there's a referendum for being studied to go statewide that would limit our contribution.
It's all perspective. You
But
understand,
don't expect Jack-
Well, it's all perspective.
I'll understand that what John is suggesting, that we're trying to work out with a POA,
Right.
is for them to voluntarily
Right.
reopen the contract now, and our ability to, we don't have a whole lot of leverage, our ability to make them take 2 tiers and things, may be something that they're not willing to do, and they say, well, we'll talk to you at the end of the contract.
Well, the leverage is what would happen in Menlo Park.
Even that, you will watch, the way it's written, you can't do anything to those that are currently in place. Everything's prospective.
Right, but at least on the second tier, you should be able to.
Oh, San Jose just did it. San Jose did it, and they reduced their salaries by 10% as well. We're not saying that's not, but San Jose did it at the end of the contract as a negotiation for the next one. And all I'm saying is that we're in the middle of a contract. Our ability to force them to do a whole lot of good
We
things.
can't force it, they have to be willing to do it, but
Exactly.
I'm just saying
Yeah.
that it seems to be in their interest to do something voluntarily rather than have some extreme thing imposed on them with a referendum
I'm
by the
all-
city.
I'm
Well,
all-
But my only comment is that we had discussed it here, and, we've had Alan done a lot of studies, and we've made recommendations, and for 2 years, we've been talking about a second tier. And that we would not be moving forward doing a lot of hiring before that. And so I guess the thing is that I really do think before we hire people, any more people, or replace any people, I think that we should get this in place.
Do we need union agreement before we put in a 2-tier system?
Yes.
Okay, what was the question, we put in what?
A 2-tier
A
system?
second tier benefit package.
Yeah.
Could we, before we negotiate, you're saying?
No, I was asking if we needed union agreement
Oh.
before we put in a 2-tier system. Because I guess we could impose it, but I think that probably what John is doing as far as a reopening to the contract and negotiating many other things, that could be part of it. And I hope that we can do that and not have everybody go on strike or whatever.
So,
I think another good point too here, because I wanted to touch on this, holding up the department in order to get until this, because we have no idea how long this process could take. And the very few positions that we'd be filling, I don't think are going to be make or break the budget for the next, 10, 20 years. And eventually it's going to take time to where new people hire in and the other people transfer out, so we start building that second tier. That's gonna take some time. It's not like we're hiring 20 people, 10 people, 5 people.
But
We've
there's
we've got a
very-
couple of
there's very-
positions to fill.
But there's very little manipulation of people out of the organization. They come here and they stay here
So
for a long
far.
time and they go through. So the thing is that bringing another person on, we're gaining that cost forever.
well, I'd like to hear the rest
What's
of
the
the committee on
contract?
that too,
One more year?
or council on that thing, because essentially what you're saying is we have a second tier for everyone other than sworn police officers. That's already in place. What we're talking about is whether or not, we had this lengthy discussion on overtime, on staffing, on production and that sort of thing. Are you all saying that don't hire anybody else, even if this negotiation takes a year?
No,
Well, I think-
I don't think we can say that. The finance committee can't say that.
Okay, well, I want to be clear what Bill
The
was
finance committee
implying.
cannot say that.
Well, I think
The council could make that decision, but the finance committee cannot make that decision. assumptions, and we don't know the assumptions.
Hey, look, there's a reasonableness test here, okay? So I'm not saying absolutely don't hire anybody, but I also can say that when we put in this second tier, which was in December, to the best of my knowledge, the briefing package didn't say we negotiated with the union, we just established it. So,
Nope. Had to be,
there was no discussion with the union, I can pull the package out, it was December 15th, 2010.
let me just tell you, the union knew about it and they had to have agreed to it. It's not something that usually the union cares too much about during negotiations, because they look at it as, oh, that just impacts people in a way that doesn't kick them out of the union or cost us money, the union money. This is a little bit different, and you gotta think of it a little bit differently, because we are asking them to break in the middle of the cycle and take some cuts. And there's political reasons they should do it, and not the least of which is pay me now or pay me later. You can't say that to them because you have to bargain in good faith, of course. But the threat is always that if you don't take a cut now, or you do something reasonable to your share of the pain, if you don't do that, union, wait till you see what the negotiations are going to be like in 2 years. And of course, that's somewhat of a threat that's depending on the council's will to in 2 years to give them, payback, so to speak.
I really think probably this is not a very good discussion in view of the fact it's all being recorded. I think we should probably limit this discussion at the present time.
Sure.
Because I don't want to.
They discuss it in the newspaper in San Francisco, so I don't know.
Well, I'm just saying, I think until we can get some actions in place, I'm not sure that putting these things out is going to do us much good, that's all.
Can I just ask a question here? For a lot of positions in the town of Atherton, we hire temporary or interim employees. Is that possible to do with filling these two positions?
We have reserve officers that are working, but they still have to meet the same standards, hiring standards, training and background, and all of that.
Yeah, no, I would expect that in the same way that,
Right.
that you meet those standards, but is it possible to hire as a temporary position to fill those vacancies that we have, and therefore we're not locking in that long-term problem that you brought
I
up?
don't think so. I think we get in
Yeah, I
trouble.
think we run into problems that the reserve officers can work limited hours, because otherwise it triggers the benefit package and some problems there.
Well, technically, the answer is, of course, you can hire interim police officers. But think about it for a second. Who's going to apply and who's going to come to a job where you tell them, by the way, your job is not more than 960 hours during the next year? What kind of person is going to apply for that? You're not going to pull anybody out of another department. And somebody coming out of the academy, that's the person that is somewhat problematic for Ed, because think about it, that person has to be totally supervised and have a training period. And by the time you get them trained, you can't hire them anymore, so they have to leave. And so at that point in time, you've just spent your money to train that police officer, and now he goes to another department.
Right.
Well, I think to add to that, in December, we'll have a senior sergeant retiring, and we need to replace that person, and we're not gonna be able to find an interim police sergeant, more than likely. I think that'd be difficult.
I would really like to move on to the next subject here. I feel uncomfortable about discussing.
Yeah, I'm satisfied with what we discussed.
Possible personnel decisions at this time.
Can I just, related to a different question, that is, what, if any, police services are we sharing with other towns or with the county? Like dispatch? Or I remember when we had the presentation about hiring the sheriff and all that, it seemed like the county detectives had a whole lot of capabilities, economies of scale, because they have somebody specialized in identity theft and somebody specialized in computer theft and so forth. Have we been able to move in that direction at all?
We only have, well, first of all, on the communication center, we have our internal communication center. The one, I guess, outsourced resource that we have is animal control with the county. But we do work very closely with the other agencies, not on a pay status, but they help us, we help them, sort of thing. So if we have a particular need an investigative tool, it's usually available to us. The San Mateo County Chiefs Association works very closely and share resources wherever we can.
Okay. And for dispatch, we just think if we have people on 24 hours, we couldn't be sharing that with Menlo Park.
They have their own standalone dispatch in Menlo Park.
Well, actually, they share with San Carlos.
Yeah,
They share with San Carlos.
They share.
Yeah. I think we've had those discussions.
Herb would like to say something.
To the extent that I might possibly represent some of the community, in response, Bill, to your point, I do understand the leverage and the need to address the budget problem and the issue of reducing these costs. But I would feel very nervous in any way tying the filling of needed police slots to success in negotiations with the union.
We don't
I
know what
think
the
we need-
timetables are.
I think we
And
need
what the
to-
hiring date is. That's what I was trying to tease out.
But I think we
as well.
need to move ahead and make sure we have the right people in place, because I've been exposed to a number of anecdotal situations where we're short on patrolmen out to respond to calls. And therefore, I'm hoping that we can fill these positions with competent, permanent people as soon as possible. And if that requires that we find a little money some other spot until we can get things worked out with the union, I would much prefer that than to the alternative.
Okay.
Well, there are a lot of unknowns.
All right.
Jim, can we let the chief finish up his last little section he's got on his equipment?
Okay.
Yeah, there's two things you need to take a look at on the supplemental request, and some of them have been around prior to my arriving on the scene. I just want to say about equipment. As you know, equipment wears out in industry standards for police on vehicles, whether they're cars or motorcycles. We'll look at the age, the mileage, what is the warranty, what is the repairs and maintenance costing, and also what is our return on investment if we wanted to do a trade-in on a particular vehicle. For instance, our BMW motorcycles are 10 years old, which is probably twice the industry standard. Usually in about 4 they're gone, but right now they're worth probably between $3,000 and $3,500. The longer the period goes on, the less they're going to be worth, obviously. So we do need to replace a couple of patrol cars, which are over and approaching 100,000 miles, and those are hard miles for municipal policing. A lot of idling time. The K-9 unit in particular is used around the clock, so there's no downtime. It's not like your car that sits in the garage. Those cars are being used. And they do need to be replaced, and there comes a point where we have to figure out how to do that. And the town does have a replacement budget. We had some discussions about how that would end up in a line item for the police department in years to come, but that's another topic probably for another time. The third item on there has to do with narrow banding, and I've got some information I'd like to share with the committee so they have some idea what we're talking about. But just to make it very, very clear and easy to understand, if this represents the radio space where radios can operate, either UHF or VHF, what the FCC wants to do is contract that to a smaller narrow banding of the radio so we get more use, more connectivity, more interoperability, and be able to add more radios for that. So the FCC is basically mandated that all public safety agencies change their radio equipment over to this narrow banding by 2013. So it's not an option, we have to do it. I think the early original calculations of what that would cost to do were somewhere in the neighborhood of $25,000. We have a more in-depth evaluation of that at today's dollars, and it's much closer to $47,000.
Where is that? What page is that on?
33.
33.
33. And
Which item, I don't,
You'll know that
the first one, 15,000?
1, 2, 3.
Request number 3.
Three.
So the 25 goes to 40?
yeah, it's,
So that's new information. It's not written down,
I
okay.
mean, the 25 goes to 43.
So if you go now to the narrow banding, is that, do we need to run parallel with the wider band radios?
no.
Okay.
No.
Well,
The 2,000 goes to 43, is that what you're
no,
saying?
no, the 25.
25.
So-
47, it was 25, it really needs to be about 47,000.
So that's request 1, 2, and 3
Yeah.
combined?
1, 2, and 3 will be a total of, instead of the 25,
43, okay.
25,014, it'll be 47, okay?
So-
Change.
So can we ask a question on on the motorcycles?
Sure.
I understand that they may be old, but for the most part, they haven't been ridden.
Well, they have, they're approaching 40,000 miles, Bill. That's the industry standard, somewhere between 40 and 50 or 60. But also, because they're twice, they're close to 10 years of age. You know, they're breaking down more frequently. Parts are more difficult to receive, and they're not under warranty. So when there is something wrong with it, we have to fix
But
it.
we have another motorcycle, right? That's working?
We have a total of 3 motorcycles.
Right.
We have 2 BMWs and a Honda.
So, and how many guys do we have riding them?
Well, right now, we have one officer, we have a couple officer vacancies. One of those is supposed to be a motor officer. We have one full-time motor officer and a reserve officer that rides.
Okay. So your goal is at any one point in time, given weather conditions, probably 2 guys are riding.
That's the plan. 2 motor officers out there, you know, across the
So
spectrum
would
during
be-
busy times.
Given the increase with the required 2-year investment on the radio systems, which, you know, I understand and agree with personally. And the understanding of the situation you've got on the cars, would it be possible for you to consider, if we have to replace the motorcycles, replace one, or get them upgraded, or use the money to have like half the money to get them retrofitted? Because the whole thing hasn't worn out. I mean,
Do they still have all the other stuff on these motorcycles, the radios and the?
Well, the new BMWs would come fully equipped. The only thing we'd have to add to them would be to transfer our radios over and our radar
But
equipment.
do the old do the old motorcycles have all that stuff on them?
Yes, they do.
I would also suggest that, we have a look at least finding out what it would take to bring one of these motorcycles up to a standard rather than, 44,000 seemed like an awful lot of money for 2 motorcycles.
yeah, and maybe we only really need one, but the other, you know, suggestion would be, you know, if we can't upgrade them or retrofit them to get them back up to renewed levels, you know, we consider one, especially in view of the communications increase.
Well, as stingy as I am on everything else, I would strongly encourage you to think twice about that. What tends to happen is that we tend not just us, government agencies in general, it's how things get run down. Is that you defer maintenance once, and then it's easy to defer it next time. You know, 10 years on a motorcycle is really long.
But, okay, how about another suggestion then? The original BMWs came on a grant. Is it possible that we could actually get somebody else to pay for them? OPM is always a great way to move forward.
Well, I've been doing some research on grants. I haven't found anything. They vary from time to time, and given the budget situation of the federal government, a lot of that stuff is dried up. I mean, there's grants out there, but not necessarily for motorcycles right now. That could change. I'll keep my eye on it. I'm also going to present to council a lease option as well. But there really isn't any upgrading or retroing of these bikes. They're a decade-old technology. They're getting tired. They're way past the industry standard. And that's where we're at on it.
Ed, I noticed that we were riding a borrowed bike from Redwood City, the Kawasaki or something like that.
Yeah, staff has been testing a variety of motorcycles, both in terms of how they handle and how suitable they are for our work here in the town of Atherton. But we're also looking at maintenance costs, we had initial purchase of them, so we borrowed that bike.
Would that be 22,000 that way?
They're pretty close. They're pretty close. You pick up an expense here, but you get some benefit otherwise. LAPD, San Diego PD, LASO, many of the larger departments have gone with BMWs for the 2012. They've done extensive testing.
And also, it's a good trade-in.
Yeah, I think I commented about that. The trade-in on the two BMWs is about $3,000 to $3,500.
What do the motorcycle police do? Is this just for policing the traffic on El Camino, or?
No, they're used throughout, throughout the town for a variety of functions, to include traffic enforcement, the facilitation of traffic flow.
They're much more effective in my mind than cars as far as traffic goes. Far more effective, as far as speeding and everything else. You can hide a motorcycle behind a bush. You can't hide a car behind a bush. And, my feeling is that the citizens of this town have always made it clear that they want good traffic enforcement. So I'm all for motorcycles, don't misunderstand me. I just feel that we've had these three sitting in the backyard there for a long time.
They weren't well managed before, and you pointed that out. It bothers me too. We've gotten rid of a lot of that old equipment. We're down to 10-year-old bikes, and I'm thinking, I would hope it would be the beginning of a 4-year or 5-year rotational program where we maximize the return we get on a trade-in against the cost of a new bike and consider that a fixed continuing cost as opposed to being such a big one-time hit.
Well, we're close to 10 to 1 now, so unless there's any, I want to cover some of these other subjects if we can, if nobody else objects. And so we're finished with that one. I would say let's talk about a physical inventory. John, do you want to? I would just say this about physical inventory before we start. In all my business careers, physical inventory once a year has been just almost something that you would never consider not doing. We haven't had it